The life and times of an ancient hero. Alexander the Great was born in the ancient Macedonian capital of Pelia in July 356 BC. His father was Philip II of Macedonia and his wife Olympias. Alexander was tutored by the great Greek philosopher Aristotle. Aristotle would be one of the most influential figures in Alexander's life. Philip II had ascended the Macedonian throne in the most difficult of times. The country was virtually at the brink of collapse. Its neighbors were ready to put an end to its existence. The Macedonian state was further weakened by inner turmoil. However, Philip would have none of that. Philip settled the inner conflict at home and built a permanent army and improved the former Greek style of fighting called the phalanx. His son, Alexander, would later use this to help conquer the known world. After Philip conquered his neighboring country of Greece, he began to make preparations for the Persian invasion. It is now that he made what ancient historians consider to be his greatest mistake of his life. Having married 6 times before, he married Cleopatra, a Macedonian girl of high nobility. The ancients say that he married her out of love. This marriage led to a break with Olympus and his son Alexander. In 336 BC, when Philip was celebrating the marriage of his daughter, he was struck by an assassin as he was attempting to enter the theater. The assassin, a young Macedonian noble, attempted to escape but was killed on the spot by a few close friends of Philip's son Alexander. Philip's dream for conquering the Persian Empire now laid on his successor, his son, Alexander III. And modern historians recognize that without the military and political efforts of Philip, Alexander would have never been able to be as successful as he was. After all, it was Philip who created the most powerful Macedonian army it had ever seen and turned Macedonia into a strong nation in arms. Determined to follow in his father's footsteps, Alexander set his sight on the great Persian Empire. One of the most famous tales associated with Alexander the Great is the legend of the Gordian knot. In Greek legend, the Gordian knot was a name given to a knot used by Gorgas to secure his ox cart. Gorgas, who was a poor peasant, arrived with his wife in a public square in an ox cart. An oracle had informed the populace that their future king would come riding in a wagon. Seeing Gorgas, the people made him king. In gratitude, Gorgas dedicated his ox cart to Zeus, tying it up with a peculiar knot. An oracle foretold that he who untied the knot would rule all of Asia. Many people tried to undo the knot, but all to no avail. In 333 BC, Alexander the Great had invaded Asia Minor and arrived in the central mountains at the town of Gordium. He was 23 years old. Undefeated, but without a decisive victory either, he was in need of an omen to prove to his troops and his enemies that the outcome of his mission to conquer the known world was possible. In Gordium, by the temple of Zeus, was the ox cart, which had been put there over 100 years before. The staves of the cart were tied together in a complex knot with the ends tucked away inside. Having arrived at Gordium, it was inconceivable that the young, impetuous king could not tackle the legendary Gordian knot. Alexander climbed the hill and approached the cart as a crowd of curious Macedonians gathered around. They watched intently as Alexander struggled with the knot and became frustrated. Alexander, stepping back, called out, "What does it matter how I loose it?" With that, he drew his sword, and in one powerful stroke, severed the knot. That night, there was a huge electrical storm, which the seers conveniently interpreted to mean that the gods were pleased with the actions of this so-called son of Zeus, who had cut the Gordian knot. Alexander's legend continued to grow. Against overwhelming odds, he led his armies to victories across the Persian territories of Asia Minor, Syria, and Egypt without suffering a single defeat. His greatest victory was at the Battle of Gaugamela, which is now northern Iraq, in 331 BC. The young king of Macedonia, leader of the Greeks, overlord of Asia Minor, and pharaoh of Egypt, became the great king of Persia at the age of 25. Over the next 8 years, in his capacity as king, commander, politician, scholar, and explorer, Alexander led his army a further 11,000 miles, founding over 70 cities and creating an empire that stretched across 3 continents and covered around 2 million square miles. The most famous of these cities that he founded was Alexandria, Egypt. The entire area from Greece in the west, north to the Danube, south into Egypt, and as far east as India, was linked together by a vast international network of trade and commerce. The most common link, however, that could be found in Alexander's great empire was Greek language and culture. Many historians credit this to the teachings of Aristotle, who was a Greek philosopher. Alexander was acknowledged as a military genius who always led by example, although his belief in his own indestructibility meant that he was often reckless with his own life and those of his soldiers. The fact that his army only refused to follow him once in 13 years of reign, during which there was constant fighting, indicates the loyalty he inspired. Unfortunately, Alexander's reign came to an end when he died of fever in Babylon in June of 323 BC. He was 32 years old. Because Alexander the Great died at such a young age, there was no clear successor to his rule. So instead, his 4 most powerful generals divided the lands Alexander had conquered into 4 Hellenistic kingdoms. Shortly before he died, he supposedly was asked whom his empire should go to, and his answer was said, to the strongest man. Although he had an unborn son, and according to recent research, an illegitimate son, there was nobody strong enough to hold his empire together. His generals fought over his land, and in the end, it was divided into multiple states. These states were known as the 4 Hellenistic kingdoms. William Shakespeare once wrote that some men are born great, some achieve greatness, and others have greatness thrust upon them. In many ways, Alexander III of Macedonia falls into all 3 of those categories. This has been the life and times of Alexander the Great.